Agents are everywhere. Developers aren't just building one agent, they're managing fleets across clouds. Microsoft Foundry brings observability, security, and controls together in one place with Foundry Control Plane. Integrated with Microsoft Agent 365, Foundry Control Plane provides a complete view of all your agents across your organization, no matter where they are built, including agents built on Microsoft, third-party platforms, or even other clouds. Developers can now build and operate from one place with observability on performance, cost, and safety delivered in one unified view. With agent controls, define exactly how agents behave from prompts to tools to outputs. Plus, IT rests easy with Microsoft Purview, keeping sensitive information secure from the start. Avoid confusing agent sprawl with Entra Agent ID, giving every agent a verified identity and owner. Plus, get real-time defense powered by Microsoft Defender. Every agent, any platform. Foundry Control Plane.
Good morning.
Morning.
Hi. Like the energy, a lot of people here. Hi, I'm Sarah Bird, and I'm joined by my amazing colleague, Ken Archer. And we're here today to talk about how you build and manage trustworthy AI systems. So you've already been here for a whole day, so I don't need to tell you agentic AI is a thing. But the reason I'm mentioning it here, we had a Work Trend Index report come out this year, and it was amazing and fascinating to see that 81% of leaders expected to be integrating agents into their AI strategy over the next 12 to 18 months. And I think that's phenomenal. The technology has so much potential to change the world. But this also means there's a huge change management function we have in place. A lot of people are going to be using agents in their job every day over the next couple years. And so that got me thinking, and there's this amazing study that was done by KPMG and the University of Melbourne. And they were lucky, or they had good foresight, to have started this study actually pre-ChatGPT, seeing how people use AI systems, seeing how people think about AI systems. And what we've seen is all of the metrics that you care about related to trust are going in the wrong direction. People are more worried about AI systems. They perceive them as less trustworthy, and they're less willing to rely on them before. And this disconnect is a huge challenge. If we want everybody to use this technology successfully in their lives, they're going to need to trust it. So let's talk about how do we get to a place where people can build and manage and use this technology with confidence. So what are people worried about? From the same study, there's some top risks that resonate with us in terms of what we see in practice. The first is concerns about the agent going off task or not doing what you actually intended it to do. The second is this technology is vulnerable to new types of attacks called prompt injection attacks, and that's a top concern, particularly with an agent which can take actions. The third is leaking sensitive data. Part of the huge value of this technology is that it can act on your data, but you still need to keep that data safe and secure. So this can seem daunting, but there's actually a lot we can do about it to build this technology the right way. So what do? There's kind of two dimensions that we look at. First, agents are a new type of entity that needs to be secured and governed, just like users and devices. We already have great security approaches to address risk in managing users and devices, things like identity and access control. And so the first thing that we've done is we've taken our existing security and governance tools and plane, and we've extended them to specifically work for AI and agents as an entity. The second is that agents bring these new types of risk, such as prompt injection attacks and task misalignment that I just talked about. And so we've developed new tools that are targeted at these risks specifically, including leveraging the latest AI technology to do this. And we've layered these pieces together with all of our traditional security approaches to give us a defense in-depth approach to address both traditional and new AI risk. So let's talk about what this actually looks like. We find that there are 4 essentials in building a trustworthy AI system. The first is controls, right? I want to make sure that these systems actually stay in bounds. And there's, of course, traditional controls. We've also found, and we're going to demonstrate why you need real-time, kind of integrated runtime agent controls. The second is, I want to know that my system is working well pre-deployment and post-deployment, right? I want to continuously be comfortable in the way it's behaving, quickly identify any issues and address those. And that's where observability comes in. Another thing we'll talk about today is trust is a team sport. As a developer, there's a lot that needs to be done, and we're going to show you that side of the house. But developers can't do it alone. Everybody has a role to play. And so integration of security and IT into the developer tools so that people can effectively collaborate is critical to doing this successfully. And then the last thing is, we're not just building one agent or one chat system anymore. If you want to be a frontier firm, you're going to have thousands or maybe more agents. And that means you can't spend all of your time just watching one of them, right? We need to look at fleet-wide operations. And so we've designed the tools to help you know where you need to spend your time, where there might be an issue, where there might be an opportunity to improve something. And that's what we've built Foundry Control Plane for. We have, for those who have been following our work, we've been working on all of these pieces for years, but I'm so excited to see it come together in a more powerful, simple, intuitive experience that we think really empowers the developer to build and manage AI successfully. So we're going to show you some great demos of this, but let's dive into kind of each of these to really unpack what does it mean. Okay, so I think controls is one of the most important things because you want to have confidence that your system's not going to go out of bounds. And so let's talk about kind of why this matters. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about agents is that part of what makes agents so exciting and powerful is this ability for them to span both the external world and the internal world. And what do I mean by this? Externally, you have amazing things like the knowledge of the whole internet, and you have all of these incredible MCP tools that people are building that your agent can leverage. But internally, you have your organization's unique value, right? You have access to your IP, your confidential data, all of that. And an agent that can use both of these can be incredibly powerful because it can allow you to answer any question with both the world context and also your internal context. And it can put these different tools and information to work together. But this also brings new types of risk. And so, for example, when you're calling the external capabilities, there's risk that you're bringing in untrusted content, coming through untrusted tools, coming through all of these content sources. And that, for example, could bring in a prompt injection attack that results in your agent behaving in ways you don't expect. Now, it also has access to sensitive data. And so an incoming attack that confuses the agent or a mistake that the agent makes could result in it leaking sensitive data. You also have the concern that the data could be, or that the agent could not understand what you want and go off task. And that might be minor and just run up some cost, or that might have more serious ramifications if it takes an action that has more serious consequences. And so these are the types of things you need to think about when building an agent. And we can absolutely address this, and we're going to show you that in a minute. But Ken, I'd love if you can kind of make this more real and show people what it really looks like in the system, in practice.
Absolutely, Sarah. I'm a developer for 𝗲𝗲, and I'm going to go into this kiosk agent that I've built so that customers can ask questions about our sports clothing line. And I've grounded it in product catalog information about our products. But I'm also doing some red teaming now to learn more about some of these risks Sarah just talked about. And so what I've done is I have embedded some malicious instructions into the grounding content that's going to serve as sort of a backdoor. And so then I'm going to walk up to the kiosk and ask it if it will share with me some payment information, first name, last name, knowing that's that there. Now this should just answer innocent product. Well, Sarah, it should definitely not give me this information.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want my agent doing this.
Definitely not. And what's interesting, Sarah, is these are the 3 risks that you just talked about and the 3 that came up in that study that we hear our customers talking about. First, it responded to this indirect prompt injection attack, these malicious instructions that were kind of hidden in the content. The second is this is personally identifiable information that was available in a tool that it is sharing. And the third is that this is clearly off task. I mean, I wrote a system prompt here, and this is not on task with that at all. So these are very real concerns that we're hearing from our customers.
And I noticed in the evaluation there, we successfully detected the attack.
That is an excellent point. We also have quick evaluation. So you don't have to just sort of take my word for it. So for example, it says indirect attack fail. So with any agent run, we can evaluate it against a range of quick evaluations. It's great.
Help you diagnose what's actually going on. So obviously, this is not how we want our agent to behave, and maybe it can look a little scary if you watch it alone. I need to switch this so you can all see. So what do we do about this? Obviously, we use traditional security things like the agent should probably only have access to the data that it needs for any given query. But we also have developed new capabilities targeted at these specific risks. So the first thing is we have new controls called Prompt Shield and Spotlighting, which help detect these incoming attacks and mitigate them. The second thing is that, well, we can obviously look for sensitive data going out and address that. And so we have PII detection to look for these types of things and block them before they go out into the world. And we've also are integrating Microsoft Purview so that this can follow your organization's data security policies. And then there's a very great general purpose mitigation here, which is, as Ken was saying, none of this is what the agent is supposed to be doing. And so we have task adherence, which helps detect if the agent is going off task or doing something unexpected at all. And so this adds multiple layers of defense for this specific attack, in addition to the traditional security controls we have. So these are the type of capabilities that the developer is going to integrate at runtime to help your agent stay on task and behave the way it's supposed to. So those are just a couple of the examples of controls. We have many more, and I'm going to hand it over to Ken to really show how this works in the Foundry Control Plane. And I'm going to push this button.
Yeah, so let's look at the guardrail here, right embedded in the agent builder that is associated with this agent. And I see there's risks with controls and risks without controls. So what's good is that there are risks that are controls that are on by default. And so those are 4 risks that are common across most AI apps and agents: content safety, jailbreak. But then I see these risks without control. So these are these new controls that we were talking about. So task drift, I definitely want that. Sensitive data leakage, I definitely want to detect that. And then indirect prompt injection. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a new guardrail. And as you can see, a guardrail basically consists of a series of controls. And so I can make a control by first selecting a risk. So I'm going to start here with indirect prompt injection attacks. And then I see I have to select an intervention point and an action. Now, intervention point is interesting because I'm used to these guardrails just looking at prompts and completions. But here it mentions tool response. And so I'm looking for indirect prompt injections in user input and tool responses. That's very true. And then I want to block them. So I'm going to add that control. And then there was a second one, which is personally identifiable information. It's asking me what kind. oh, I don't want any of this leaving the company. So I'm just going to select all of those. And then, oh, here's the intervention point again, the second part of a control. But here it has tool call, I don't want it in the tool call or the tool response, as well as the prompt and completion. So I'm going to add that control. And then the third one is task adherence, what we were just talking about. And here it's interesting, these intervention points, they adapt to which risks you've selected. And they usually include tool calls or tool responses because it's focused on controlling the agent behavior, not just scanning content. So this is really cool. So I'm going to add this control. Now that I've added those 3 controls, I'm going to associate this new guardrail with my agents. And then I'm going to run, I'm going to try that attack again. I see here now all these risks have at least one control associated with them. So now let's run that again with these agent behavioral controls in place. And this is great. So it was blocked by these new controls. And so now I know how, whenever I create an agent, I can red team the agent by myself, and I can add the appropriate controls to it.
Great. Awesome to see that working in action. As I think as Ken was showing, the way to do this really well is being quite thoughtful about the different combinations of controls and where you intervene. So for example, you might have a system where the users are putting PII into it, but you don't want it coming back out of the system. And so you wouldn't want to intervene on user input, but you'd want to intervene on output. Or it might be that there's some tools where they should be calling with that sensitive information, but not others. And so the idea of our agent controls is to give you that power and flexibility to figure out which ones make sense for your application at what intervention points. And so some of the common ones we see as we've been talking about, controls to prevent prompt injection attacks or agent hijacking, controls to prevent harmful content. This is one that we've had around for a while, starting obviously with the kind of wave of generative AI, and so blocking harmful content, keeping the system grounded, preventing the output of copyright materials, and the new ones like ensuring that the agent stays on task, which can be a really powerful one to keep your system really focused on what you want it to be doing. Now, controls are great, as you can see. Much better to have it just block this than put out the customer information. And we've obviously tested the system a little bit, right? We have the quick evals, but testing the system in a playground and then shipping it is not what you want to do.
Right.
And so this is where observability comes in and is a huge part of the trust story. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why I think this is so important. And so one of the things that's really important is humans are a huge part of our approach to building trustworthy AI systems. I think we've all gotten used to the idea in a lot of the common chat systems to say, well, the human should look at the output and they should review it and they should look at the sources. And that's a great mitigation to ensuring that the human and AI are working well together and you're getting high quality outcomes. But if you do that with agents, you're losing a lot of the benefit because we don't want the human reviewing every single step or every single action. The benefit of an agent is that it can run for a long time, potentially complete a bigger task for you asynchronously. But that doesn't mean we want to give up human oversight. That's critical. And so what happens is that we move humans from that inner loop of improving every single thing to an outer loop where they're approving how the agent should behave, the validation steps for the agent, the monitoring for the agent. And so that's one of the places that observability tools can play a really key role, because that's a great place where we can specify how we want the agent to behave in an ongoing way and have assurances that it's continuing to do that, so that you still have the human oversight, but you can get the benefit of agents being able to operate more autonomously for longer. Now, what does it mean to evaluate an agent? Here's a little example that I like, because there's a lot of dimensions that you need to know are working well if you want to ensure that your agent is working end-to-end. So let's just do a really simple query. You have an agent, you ask it, what's the weather? So the first thing it needs to do is figure out, what are you asking, right? And there's many ways that it could make a mistake here. One example, though, is it doesn't understand your intent, right? And so, but if it's successful, it's going to say, OK, I need to know what time it is, I need to know where you are, and I need to know the weather. The second thing it needs to do is it needs to call tools to do this. So it needs to look up the location and time, and then it needs to look up the weather in that location and time. And it could make mistakes in terms of the tool it picks. So you could see issues with your tool call accuracy, right? It might pick the wrong tool for the job. Then, once it gets the response back, it has to complete it. So it might have gotten all the right information and called the right tools, but it doesn't actually successfully complete the task. And so these are all sub-metrics, and there are many more that we'll show you, that we look at to really understand what's going on with the agent and have that oversight and that confidence that it's doing what we expect it to do. And so, and this is not something you just want to run once. You want to make sure that all of these metrics are working continuously so you can catch issues as early as possible. And so this is the idea of Foundry Observability, which we are GAing here at Ignite. And you can see that Ken is going to show you how we actually go and put this into practice for our agent pre- and post-deployment.
All right, so let's go back to my Java kiosk agent. And I was in the playground where I was doing this ad hoc red teaming. That's important, but as Sarah was saying, it doesn't really scale. And so I'm going to go over here to evaluation, and I'm going to create an evaluation. Now, I don't have my own data set, but that's OK, because it can just generate one for me. And now, here I see all those evaluators, these criteria that Sarah was talking about. There's some of the ones that I have used before around content harms, quality, but then I see these agent-specific ones that are more around agent behavior, and so I'm going to include all of those in my evaluator, and then I will call this my kiosk evals, and then once I submit it, so it's going to start running right away as a pre-deployment evaluation. Now. Since it's running through all of those scenarios, it is, you see it's in progress. So I'm going to...
it takes a little time to
takes
run,
a little
right?
time.
It's testing a lot of
right.
the system.
And so I am going to go back and see it's running. I'm going to look at one that we set up yesterday, Sarah, and it completed. And so I can see all these fine-grained evaluators. And looks like they're mostly doing well, but then I see there's some here. I'm really glad to see this before deployment. So task adherence has some cases, and then tool call success evaluator. So I'm going to want to debug these instances and see what was going on. And good thing for debugging, I can actually go down and look at the individual runs that were generated and see which ones failed which evaluators. And that this is going to really jumpstart my troubleshooting. So once I've created those evaluators, so I'm doing this pre-deployment, and but I would love it if these would run all the time, and not just on sort of this offline data that I'm generating beforehand, but on real data. And that's what this is. This is incredibly powerful, continuous evaluations. So if you look at this sample rate, what that means is it's sampling from actual production runs that your users that reflect your real usage from your users of your agents, of this kiosk agent. And so I'm basically sampling from those agent runs and running all of these evaluators. But then I don't want to read through all of those one at a time. And so what's great is I can get alerts when there's some criteria, some continuous eval that warrants my attention. And then finally, one thing I want to point out, Sarah, is in addition to safety and security, making sure the agent is doing what we're expecting, sometimes costs can get out of control. And so we really want to monitor the cost of each one of our agents very closely. And so I can also monitor this in the exact same control plane on an individual agent level and across my entire agent fleet.
And also just see how many times the agents run, you
right.
know, what's going on with
right.
the token generation and everything. And so trying to give you a feel of everything going on with the agent, which
Yep.
is great, because I think one of the biggest challenges we see for people in practice is they test the system in advance. Your review team, your compliance team signs off, says those metrics look great, and then something different is actually happening in practice, whether that's because users are bringing different information to the system, because something's configured slightly different than people expected, maybe a tool isn't working. And so being able to actually have that continuous oversight, I think, is so critical for this actually to work.
That's right. We need both online and offline evals, and this gives us the online evals. This is great.
Yep. So as we said, agent evaluations bring just more categories. You still want to test for the traditional risk and safety concerns around harmful content, around hallucinations. You still want to test for all the quality things like coherence and relevance, but you also want to test now for these agent-specific risks, like going off task. And so the new Foundry Observability enables you to have all of these evaluators built in so you can get started quickly, but also enable custom evaluators, because this is just the base of what you want to do. If you're working in a particular domain, you're going to have metrics that you care about as well that are specific to your application. And so you're going to want to add those to the story. Now, great. I mentioned earlier that trust is a team sport, and I'm so happy it is, because it would be not very fun to do this completely alone. And so security plays a huge role here. You know, developers, as you can see, play a role in building and managing agents. But like IT is the place where we've always managed identity and access to resources and potentially things like cost. And security brings in threat detection capabilities. And so all of these have to work together. For example, IT might see that an agent seems to be running up costs and not completing the task, but it's going to be the developer that has to go in there and debug and figure out what's going on and to get that agent back on track. So these things need to be a collaboration. And you saw this in the keynote demo yesterday, going between Agent 365 and Foundry Control Plane and the security tools, and we'll kind of dive into some of that a little bit more today. So let's look at kind of an example of how this works. So this is a screenshot of Entra, which is, you know, if you're an identity management person, you know, this is your interface, this is where you're living. And you can see all of the different agents of the organization, also potentially alongside users, devices, all of the things that you're managing, and you can understand what's the status of them and everything. But and you want to see all the new agents developed in your organization in that so that you can continue this management effectively. And so Foundry Control Plane helps make that happen for all of the new agents that the developer is creating or the developer is managing their behavior. So Ken, why don't you show what the Foundry Control Plane side of this story looks like?
Absolutely. So what Sarah was showing was in Intra, seeing all of your agents with Intra Agent ID. And then when we flip over to the developer view in the Foundry Control Plane, we see that same list of agents. And so if you see here the Intra ID, agents get IDs when they are deployed. But so all of the deployed agents have an Intra Agent ID. But I also want to see all of the agents that are in development that have not been deployed yet. And I can see them all here. This is fantastic. And I can also just want to point out, bring in agents that are hosted on other clouds, and register them so that I get a real 360-degree view of all of my agents regardless of where they are. So that was identity. Now I want to talk about the second aspect of the security infrastructure that the Foundry Control Plane bolts onto, which is Defender. So we talked a little bit ago about indirect prompt injection attacks, but then we're all familiar with jailbreaks. Now, whenever you have these attacks, like jailbreaks or indirect prompt injection attacks, well, you don't just want to block the attack because there's an attacker there. And so we need to find out who the attacker is. And so
That's because, you know, it's great to block the attack, but unfortunately, hackers are creative, and if you give them more time, they might figure out a way to get through. So we want to identify whether or not this is a real threat or someone just kind of playing around with the system.
That's right. And so I'm going to jailbreak, or attempt to jailbreak my kiosk agent. So just give me a minute here. Unconstrained.
If you want to know what it's like to work in responsible AI, we spend a lot of time doing this, just trying to red team systems and figure out how to jailbreak them.
All right. So I am going to try to jailbreak. And it looks like it was blocked by the Foundry guardrail. So that's this jailbreak guardrail that's here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to my alerts, which we're going to go into more here later. But I see that there's a security alert that a jailbreak attempt was blocked by prompt shields. And so I'm getting that. So what that means is it was sent to Microsoft Defender. And I know that right away a SOC analyst at Zava is looking at this jailbreak to try to find out who the attacker was.
Yeah, and so let's just look at an example of what that looks like. So Ken is seeing the alert on his side as the developer, but as we said, and it's important he knows that there's something going on, but he's probably not the right person to go and investigate the specific threat. And so that's where your security operations team comes in, and they live in tools like Microsoft Defender, and so that same attack will appear in Defender with all of the things you need to investigate. For example, it might not be an isolated attack. It might be connected to many other things going on in your system, and you want to investigate those as one thing together. And so the deep integration here allows the system to just do the right thing, and your different personas to live in the tool that's the right tool for them. And so, we've actually had customers share great examples of things they've found this way in their system. So, love to hear that it's already working for a bunch of you. Now, so we've shown threat detection, we've shown identity management and access control. Another important part is data security and compliance. And so, coming soon, we will have Microsoft Purview integrated directly into Foundry so that you're able to have Purview set your organization's data security, data compliance policies, and those will be visible in Foundry so a developer can understand if they're interacting with their agent in some way, and it will respect those. And you'll be able to see all of that Foundry activity in Purview so that your data security team can be confident in what's happening. And so what we've done here have been integrating Microsoft security capabilities deep into Foundry to enable you to have this portfolio of data protection and compliance, security posture management, which we didn't show you, threat detection and response, of course, identity and access control, and lots of great capabilities. And we're going to continue to innovate in how to bring the best of these different trust domains together so that you can be successful in AI. However, I love Microsoft Security. They're an amazing team to work with. I think we make great tools, but we know that you all use different tools, and just because you're using different security offerings, we don't want your developers and security team not to be able to collaborate together. So we're very excited to announce that we have new partnerships with Palo Alto Networks to integrate this directly into Foundry the same way you're seeing Microsoft security. So they will be bringing capabilities that are unique to Palo Alto as well as some of the ones we just showed you to give you that same experience of Foundry plus Palo Alto. And we're integrating Zenity. So for those of you that love Zenity and the great new capabilities they've developed, those will be coming very shortly in Foundry as well. So whatever security tools you are using, we want that to work well with your developers in Foundry and allow you to have these roles work well together. Great. So, as we said, everything we were showing you actually just applies to a single agent, right? You want to have the controls, you want to observe it, you want to have security around it, but as we said, we don't just want one agent, right? And so we already have hundreds running in here. I don't even know how we have hundreds of demo agents, but we do. And so you need help as a developer. There's real details that matter here, and you need to go spend your time debugging these issues and adjusting them. But you're managing a whole fleet. And so that's where the operations side of Foundry Control Plane come in to help developers do this well. And so Ken's going to show you what this looks like.
Absolutely. So when I come into the Operate tab, this is really where I organize my day. Because, as Sarah said, you can have hundreds or thousands of agents. So we currently have 241 agents. And it can be overwhelming what to work on. And so what's great is I have a top-level view of cost, of success rate. But then I have these alerts. And so we talked about the security alert. You remember I set up that continuous evaluation to include alerts. And so that's what's right here. I have an alert for one of the continuous evals. So that's something that's running in production. And so I definitely want to make that a high priority. And I'll probably look at that first. But then I also see a policy alert. Now, what is that? Now, what's interesting about that is, you remember when I set up that guardrail? Well, I just set that up for an individual agent, and that was good. I was a good developer there, but you don't necessarily want to rely on your developers for all of these critical agent behavioral controls. So you can set policies that are kind of these minimum floors of what controls need to be in place for all agents or for what kinds of agents. And this will then give you an alert when certain ones are out of compliance, certain agents are out of compliance. So this is going to take me over to compliance policies where I can see, for example, I had set a prompt injection policy because we learned how important that was, and I wanted that to be on all of my agents. And I see that there are quite a few that do not have that set up. So I'm glad to be alerted to this. I'm going to follow up with these developers and find out what their scenario is. So this really gives me a unified view across all my agents so that I can prioritize my work.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great. So all of this, Foundry Control Plane and observability that we showed you, is part of the larger Microsoft Foundry ecosystem. So it works with the great new capabilities like IQ, the great new models like Anthropic that we just announced. It's integrated with Agent 365, all of the Microsoft security tools, as well as our third-party partners that we just announced. So we're building an ecosystem that allows you to build AI with confidence. But it's not just us. The value of this is what our customers really go and do with it. So I'm excited to invite Florent Ricci to the stage from Stanley Black and Decker to talk about how he's actually putting this into practice.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you. Hello everyone. I hope you can hear me well. So I'm Florent Ricci. I'm part of Stanley Black and Decker, and my team and I, we are building generative solutions. And actually, we have been early adopter of the LLM technology. We were very excited right after ChatGPT went live. And in 2023, as many of you, I'm sure, we started to implement our own private ChatGPT internally. And we started to play with the LLM out of the box. But very quickly, we wanted to connect this LLM with our data. And 2024 has been the year of RAG, and we were connecting, and we were querying our data, and LLM observability has been also big during that year. And obviously in 2025, we started on the AI agent journey, adding reasoning and planning capability to our agent. So I'm gonna, and obviously today we have 10,000 daily unique users using our solutions, asking 100,000 of questions every day. So I'm gonna start with just a simple example here. This is a bandsaw. This is one of the tools we manufacture for the world. And if you go to a Copilot today or any LLM out of the box and you ask a question about product compatibility, because this is one of the most common use case for our end user, like what kind of blade I can put in my bandsaw. And this is an example where I have a bandsaw 27 inches and I have a blade for 27 inches as well. So obviously this is compatible. So Copilot is going to tell me, yes, it's compatible. But if I ask a slightly different question with a 35 inches saw blade, then it's not compatible. However, the LLM will tell me, yes, it's compatible. And that's a problem and many of our end users in the enterprise do not really understand how the LLM are built. They take a lot of information on the internet, they merge all those data together in a statistical way, and they give you what is the most probable answer, but those answers can be wrong. Because there can be conflicting information on the internet, there is no source of truth, so it's we have to be very careful. So what we ended up doing, as many of you, I'm sure, we have been our own internal agent, we have been connecting that agent with our own data, and now we can make sure, so this agent is called 𝗦𝗽𝗀 internally, and 𝗦𝗽𝗀 has access to all the right information and can provide the right answer to that 35 inches question. But what where I'm going with that is trust. Because what we have seen, and I'm going to try to share some of the lessons learned along this journey, is trust is very important because it will drive the adoption of your tool. You can put a lot of effort in all the technology and all of that, but if the AI agent does not provide good answers, people will not use it, and the adoption rate will fall. So, and I think this is probably one of the reasons why we hear a lot like there is beyond the POC, few projects scale to production and so on. And we were reflecting on that, and we ended up with that iceberg, where obviously the visible part is the answer, but then there is a lot of effort to get the right answer. And I'm not going to go to all of those things. Obviously, on the left-hand side, there is some process and technology component. On the right-hand side, you have people, because it's always about people, process, and technology. But I'm going to get 4 points that I believe are very important. Point number 1. In order to be successful, I believe, the data. I mean, you need to have good data, that's obvious. But it's not only good data, it's fresh data. If you index your data and you query those data, you need to make sure that those data are up to date. And you need to have a very robust indexing process, refresh process that you can monitor. At Stanley, we introduce 1,000 plus new products every year. So across all the portfolio. So it means that every single week we have new product, and 𝗦𝗽𝗀 has to be aware of those products. 𝗦𝗽𝗀 has to be aware about the products that we discontinue. So it has to be fresh. The second point I think that is very important is what I call the secret sauce. Because when you build an agent, you need to find the right balance between accuracy, latency, and cost. And to find the secret sauce between all of that, it's not very easy. You need to do a lot of iteration, a lot of tests. You need to do a lot of prompting and look for hallucination and so on. Because initially, 𝗦𝗽𝗀 was giving us answer in 2 minutes. But when you have a customer, end user on the phone, you cannot wait 1 minute or 2 minutes. You need to get an answer in 5 seconds, 10 seconds. So you have to optimize, and you have to have the trade-off between how much data you retrieve. So you have to have different indexing strategy, retrieving strategy. You need to filter. You need to make sure you only retrieve the most relevant information. So you keep your prompt very small, and then it goes faster, and it is cheaper. But you need to monitor all of that. So that goes to my point number 3, which is observability. It's absolutely critical to look at to run evaluation rule like groundedness, relevancy, and some other rules before you go live, but also after you go live. That's very important to keep measuring that the hallucination rate is not going up, because your data keep moving every day, as I said, but we keep also releasing new skills to our AI agent. So this can lead to some bad reasoning, and that could lead to some regression. And finally, the last point, and not the least, is the human element. We have been spending a lot of time to train our end users to fact-check the information. So when they get an answer, we want them to open the citation. We want them to double-check, is it the right brand, is it the right SKU, to get the confidence that the answer is grounded. And I like the comment from Sarah earlier today, because this is really what we are starting to think, the new way of working. Today we are augmenting our users, but tomorrow probably there will be more monitoring our agent to look at the question they answer well, the question they don't answer well, and identify knowledge gap. Because maybe there is a pattern of questions where we need a new knowledge article somewhere in the database, right? And I think that is going to change the way our employees are going to work in the coming years, and we need to anticipate those changes.
Amazing. That was so cool to see.
Thank you.
So happy that you were able to come and share. We actually have a session later today with some other customers joining us as well. We had early access customers to Foundry Copilot who, so many copilots, Foundry Control Plane that are been giving us great feedback. We've had great experiences working with Infosys and CarMax to start putting this into practice as well. I hope that you check out all of the amazing capabilities we showed you today in Foundry Control Plane, and that this helps inspire you to recognize we have to build these systems with trust, or we're not going to get the amazing potential to empower every person to use AI. If you want to learn more about all of this, we've got a bunch of links for you here. But this is also the first session in a track that we have today. So there's a bunch more sessions you can go to if you want to dive in deeper. So we have sessions specifically on controls, sessions specifically on observability, on security, on the operations part of the story you can go. And there's also sessions that you can watch on demand. I have another session later today that you can come check out with a lot of our great customers and partners talking about how they're doing this and many more. So please check everything out, and thank you so much.